Beatrice Hayes stood on the mahogany porch, tossing a size 22 dress into the mud. "Pigs don't belong in mansions," she spat, slamming the door. Stranded in the freezing rain, Penelope thought her life was over. She didn't know Chicago's most ruthless crime syndicate boss was watching from the shadows. Rain lashed against the opulent brick facades of Oak Brook, Illinois, cutting through Penelope's thin cardigan like icy needles. She stood on the edge of the manicured lawn, staring at the heavy oak door of the house she had called home for 3 years. At her feet sat 2 black garbage bags, hastily stuffed with whatever clothes Beatrice Hayes had deemed cheap enough for Penelope to keep. Penelope was a heavy woman. She carried her weight in her broad hips, thick thighs, and soft stomach, a fact that had never bothered her until she married into the Hayes family. For 5 years prior, she had worked grueling 60-hour weeks, managing a local bakery, sacrificing her own comfort and health to put Gregory Hayes through his grueling years at Northwestern Law. Back then, Gregory had loved her curves. He had buried his face in her soft neck and promised her the world. But the moment Gregory became a junior partner at Crane, McGill and Associates, the world he promised her became a sterile, ruthless place where appearances meant everything. And Penelope, at 240 pounds, did not fit the aesthetic. "You are an embarrassment," Beatrice's voice echoed in Penelope's ears, sharp and venomous, just as it had sounded 10 minutes ago in the foyer. The matriarch of the Hayes family had orchestrated this ambush perfectly. "Gregory has a corporate gala next week. The partners' wives are all wearing Prada and Chanel. You waddle into rooms, Penelope. You sweat when you climb the stairs. You're fat, and the Hayes family does not tolerate such grotesque weakness. You are a liability to his career." Penelope had looked to her husband, waiting for the defense that a loyal partner should offer. Instead, Gregory had stood by the staircase, adjusting his Rolex, the very watch she had bought him to celebrate his passing the bar. He wouldn't even meet her eyes. "It's for the best, Pen," Gregory had muttered, his voice devoid of emotion. "I've already filed the papers. My mother is right. We're just moving in different circles now. You don't fit in. You haven't fit in for a long time." The betrayal was a physical blow, heavier than the rain that now soaked her to the bone. Penelope knelt in the mud, her fingers numb as she dragged the garbage bags toward the curb. Cars sped by on the wet asphalt, their headlights illuminating her humiliating exit. She had given him her youth, her savings, and her unwavering devotion, only to be thrown out like expired milk because her waistline wasn't acceptable for high society. Shivering violently, Penelope managed to call an Uber. When the Honda Civic pulled up, the driver gave her a look of deep pity. She wrestled the wet bags into the trunk, her chest heaving, the physical exertion a stark reminder of the body that had just cost her her marriage. "Where to, miss?" the driver asked gently as she slumped into the back seat, dripping water onto the upholstery. "Just take me to the city," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Carmichael's Diner on 8th Street. Please." It was a 40-minute drive from the affluent suburbs into the gritty heart of Chicago. Penelope stared out the window, tears hot on her cheeks, mixing with the rainwater. She had $20 in her purse, a dead phone, and no family left to call. Her parents had passed away in a car accident when she was 19, leaving her entirely alone in the world. Gregory had been her entire support system, the center of her universe. Now, she was utterly adrift. Carmichael's Diner was a beacon of neon pink in the gloomy downpour. Penelope dragged her bags inside, ignoring the curious glances of the late-night truckers and insomniacs. She slid into a cracked leather booth in the back corner, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her thick frame. A tired waitress poured her a cup of black coffee, leaving her to her misery. Penelope wrapped her plump hands around the porcelain mug, desperate for warmth. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to suppress the sob building in her throat. "I am nothing," she thought, the toxic words of Beatrice Hayes sinking deep into her psyche. "I am fat. I am ugly. I am unworthy of being loved." But Penelope was entirely unaware that her miserable departure from the Hayes estate had not gone unnoticed. For the past 6 months, the Hayes family had been under heavy surveillance. Gregory Hayes, in his arrogant ambition, had thought himself clever enough to launder money for the O'Donnell syndicate, a dangerous game of financial Russian roulette. And the man hunting the O'Donnells had been watching the house tonight. As Penelope cried into her coffee, the diner bell chimed, slicing through the quiet hum of the room. The atmosphere in the diner shifted instantly. The temperature seemed to drop, and the casual chatter died down into an uneasy, suffocating silence. Penelope sniffled and opened her eyes. A man was walking toward her booth, flanked by 2 towering figures in dark, tailored suits. The man in the center moved with the terrifying, fluid grace of an apex predator. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that clung to broad, muscular shoulders, radiating power, wealth, and an undercurrent of pure, unrestrained violence. His face was all sharp angles, a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, a straight, aristocratic nose, and eyes the color of forged steel. This was Dominic Falcone, heir to the Falcone crime family, absolute ruler of Chicago's underground, and a man whose name was only spoken in hushed, terrified whispers. Penelope shrank back into the booth, instinctively trying to make her large body smaller as the towering man stopped directly in front of her table. His guards, one of whom was his notoriously brutal enforcer, Matteo Ricci, took up positions by the diner's entrance, turning the open sign to closed and flipping the lock. The diner staff suddenly found themselves very busy in the kitchen. Dominic didn't ask for permission. He slid into the booth across from Penelope, his piercing gaze locking onto her tear-streaked face. "Penelope Gallagher," Dominic said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that sent a strange shiver down her spine, a sound like velvet wrapped around a brick. He used her maiden name, a detail she didn't miss. Do I know you?" Penelope stammered, pulling her damp cardigan tighter across her chest. "No, but I know you," Dominic replied, resting his large hands on the table. He wore a heavy gold signet ring on his right index finger. "I know that exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes ago, your pathetic excuse for a husband and his venomous mother threw you onto the street like trash." Penelope gasped, a flush of fresh humiliation creeping up her neck. "How do you know that? Are you a private investigator?" A dark, dangerous smirk ghosted across Dominic's lips. "Something like that. My name is Dominic Falcone." Penelope's breath hitched. Even she, disconnected from the criminal underworld, knew that name. It was synonymous with extortion, violence, and untouchable power. Panic spiked in her chest. Had Gregory borrowed money from the mob? Was she about to be killed to settle a debt? "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't have anything. If Gregory owes you money, I don't have a dime. They took my name off the joint accounts yesterday. I'm completely broke." Dominic's steel gaze softened. Just a fraction. He leaned forward, the scent of expensive bergamot cologne and danger drifting across the table. "I'm not here to collect a debt from you, Penelope. I am here to offer you a new life." Penelope stared at him, bewildered. Why? Because your ex-husband is a fool, Dominic stated coldly. Gregory has been scrubbing money for the O'Donnell family, my rivals. He thinks he's hidden his tracks behind offshore LLCs, but he's sloppy. Tomorrow, I am going to dismantle his entire life. I am going to bankrupt Crane and McGill, seize the Hayes family estate, and leave Gregory and Beatrice bleeding on the pavement of the world they think they own. Penelope's heart pounded against her ribs. The casual way he spoke of utter destruction was terrifying. Yet, somewhere deep in the bruised, broken parts of her soul, a tiny spark of vindication flared. "But why talk to me?" she asked, genuinely confused. "I'm nobody. Beatrice made that perfectly clear. I'm just the fat, embarrassing wife they finally got rid of." She choked on the words, dropping her gaze to her hands. Suddenly, Dominic reached across the table. His large, warm fingers gently but firmly gripped her chin, forcing her to look back up into his intense eyes. "Never insult yourself in my presence again," he commanded, his voice dropping to a gravelly register that made her stomach flutter. "The Hayes family is bred for superficiality. They are weak people who desire fragile, brittle women. I am a man who rules an empire. I do not want a fragile woman." Dominic's gaze dropped to her mouth, then dragged slowly down to the heavy, soft curves of her chest and hips, before locking onto her eyes once more. There was no pity in his stare. There was hunger. "You are built like a Renaissance painting, Penelope. You have warmth, loyalty, and strength. Qualities Gregory was too blind to see, and Beatrice was too jealous to tolerate," Dominic continued, his thumb gently wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "But I have a proposition for you, a mutually beneficial arrangement." Penelope swallowed hard, unable to look away from his mesmerizing eyes. "What kind of arrangement?" "I need a wife," Dominic said matter-of-factly. "My grandfather's will stipulates that I cannot inherit the legitimate corporate holdings of the Falcone Syndicate unless I am married by my 35th birthday. That birthday is tomorrow. I need a woman who is not tied to the mob, a woman who is clean, loyal, and who I can trust. In exchange, I will give you everything." He released her chin and leaned back, his imposing frame dominating the small space. "Marry me tomorrow at noon," Dominic offered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You will never worry about money again. You will never sleep in the cold. You will have my protection, my name, and my absolute fidelity. And tomorrow night, you will stand by my side in a $5,000 gown when I walk into the Hayes estate and personally evict Beatrice and Gregory from their home." Penelope's mind spun. This was madness. It was insane. She was a baker from the suburbs, sitting in a dingy diner, being asked to marry a mafia boss. But as she looked down at the plastic garbage bags containing her entire life, a fierce, reckless desperation took hold of her. Gregory had discarded her because she wasn't good enough, because she was heavy, because she was a pig. Now the most powerful man in Chicago was looking at her like she was a queen. "What do I have to do?" Penelope whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. Dominic's smirk returned, predatory and triumphant. "Just say yes, Mia Bella, and leave the bags. You won't be needing cheap clothes anymore." Penelope took a deep breath, the smell of rain and old coffee filling her lungs. She looked at Dominic Falcone, seeing the dark promise in his eyes. "Yes," she said. Dominic stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He extended a hand to her. When Penelope placed her soft, plump hand in his massive, scarred one, he pulled her up from the booth with effortless strength. He didn't look at her body with disgust. He pulled her close, his hand resting possessively on the curve of her wide hip. "Matteo," Dominic barked to the enforcer by the door. "Call the penthouse. Tell the staff to prepare the master suite. And wake up Antonio. I need a wedding dress tailored by 8 a.m. A real dress for a real woman." As Dominic led her out of the diner and into the waiting armored SUV, Penelope realized she was no longer a discarded wife crying in the rain. Tomorrow, she was going to be Mrs. Dominic Falcone. And the Hayes family had no idea what was coming for them. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Astor Street penthouse, waking Penelope from the deepest sleep she had experienced in years. She blinked, her senses adjusting to the sheer scale of the master suite. The bed was massive, draped in Egyptian cotton and heavy silk, and the skyline of downtown Chicago stretched out before her like a glittering kingdom. A soft knock at the mahogany door interrupted her awe. A petite woman in a sharp blazer stepped in, pushing a rolling rack of garment bags, followed by a frantic-looking Italian man with a measuring tape draped around his neck. "Good morning, Miss Penelope. I am Antonio," the man announced, bowing slightly. "Mr. Falcone has given me strict instructions. You are to be married at noon, and tonight you are to ruin a dynasty. We have much work to do." For the next 4 hours, Penelope was pampered by a fleet of stylists. Antonio did not sung or make passive-aggressive comments about her size, a stark contrast to the boutique clerks Beatrice Hayes had forced her to endure. Instead, Antonio looked at her wide hips, heavy thighs, and full bust as if she were a masterpiece waiting to be framed. He meticulously altered a cream-colored silk midi dress for the noon ceremony, pinning it to accentuate the narrowest part of her waist while letting the fabric flow elegantly over her stomach and hips. At precisely 11:50 a.m., Penelope stood in front of a gilded floor mirror. She hardly recognized the woman staring back. Her thick mahogany hair was styled in soft, cascading waves. Her skin glowed. The cream silk hugged her curves flawlessly, making her feel voluptuous, grounded, and undeniably beautiful. The door clicked open, and Dominic Falcone stepped into the suite. He froze, his steely eyes sweeping over her. He was dressed in a tailored midnight blue suit, looking every inch the lethal monarch of the Chicago underworld. Slowly, he crossed the room, the heavy thud of his leather shoes echoing against the hardwood. When he reached her, he didn't offer a polite compliment. He looked at her with a visceral, possessive hunger. "You look exactly as a queen should," Dominic murmured, his deep voice vibrating in the quiet room. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a velvet box. Inside rested a breathtaking 6-carat cushion-cut diamond from Harry Winston, flanked by deep green emeralds. He slid it onto her plump finger, the ring sizing perfect. "No more cheap imitations, Penelope. From today onward, only the absolute best." The wedding took place in Dominic's private mahogany-paneled library. The officiant was a sweating, trembling judge from the Cook County Circuit Court, a man clearly heavily indebted to the Falcone family. Matteo Ricci and a few high-ranking syndicate lieutenants stood by the door, their expressions stoic, their suit jackets bulging slightly at the ribs. "I, Dominic, take you, Penelope," Dominic vowed, staring intensely into her eyes. There was no hesitation, no reluctance. His large, scarred hands held hers in a grip that promised absolute protection. When he kissed her to seal the union, it was not a chaste, performative peck. His mouth claimed hers with a bruising, intoxicating heat, leaving Penelope breathless and flushed. By the time the afternoon rolled around, Penelope was legally Mrs. Dominic Falcone. The paperwork was signed, filed, and sealed by the terrified judge. But the real business of the day was only just beginning. Dominic poured them both a glass of Macallan 25 as they sat by the fireplace. He handed her a thick manila folder. "Look inside," he instructed. Penelope opened the folder. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, and mortgage transfer documents. "I don't understand." "Your ex-husband thought he was a genius," Dominic explained, leaning back in his leather wing-back chair. "Gregory has been moving dirty money for the O'Donnell syndicate through his firm, Crane, McGill and Associates. But Gregory is arrogant, and arrogance breeds mistakes. He leveraged everything to cover up a $3 million deficit when a wire transfer was flagged by the feds last month. He took out a second mortgage on the Oakbrook estate, and he borrowed heavily against his own firm's escrow accounts." Penelope gasped. "He stole from his own law firm?" "Yes," Dominic smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. "And through a shell corporation called Vanguard Holdings, I just bought all of his debt. I own the mortgage to the Hayes estate. I own his firm's liabilities. He is entirely at my mercy." Dominic stood, walking over to trace the line of Penelope's jaw with a warm finger. "Tonight, Crane, McGill and Associates is hosting their annual Partners Gala at the Oakbrook House. Everyone who is anyone in Chicago's legal society will be there. And we are going to crash the party." The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the manicured streets of Oakbrook glistening under the street lamps. The Hayes estate was brilliantly lit, with valets in white coats rushing to park a line of Mercedes, Porsches, and BMWs. Inside, a string quartet played Vivaldi, and waiters circulated with trays of caviar and champagne. Beatrice Hayes held court in the grand foyer, draped in a vintage Chanel suit, dripping in pearls. Gregory stood by her side, desperately trying to project the image of a successful, untouchable junior partner. He had already spun the narrative of his sudden divorce. Penelope was unstable, a glutton, a woman who simply couldn't handle the pressures of his rising star. The society wives nodded in faux sympathy, sipping their Dom Perignon. Outside, a sleek, armored black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided up the driveway, bypassing the valets entirely. Matteo Ricci stepped out first, adjusting his tie before opening the rear door. Dominic Falcone emerged, radiating a terrifying aura that made the valets instinctively step back. Then Dominic reached his hand into the car. Penelope stepped onto the pavement. She wore a custom, deep ruby-red silk gown that clung to her heavy breasts and flared elegantly over her wide hips. Around her neck sat a Cartier diamond choker that sparkled furiously under the porch lights. Her feet, previously squeezed into painful department store pumps, were now clad in custom-widened Christian Louboutin heels. She looked magnificent, wealthy, and completely untouchable. Dominic offered his arm. Penelope took it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. But as she looked up at her new husband's profile, a surge of adrenaline and profound confidence washed over her. Matteo didn't bother knocking. He kicked the heavy oak door open with a resounding crack that echoed through the mansion. The string quartet skidded to a halt. The chatter of 60 elite guests died instantly. Every eye turned toward the doorway. Gregory Hayes froze mid-laugh, his champagne glass slipping from his fingers and shattering onto the marble floor. Beatrice's jaw dropped so far, she looked comically unhinged. Dominic and Penelope walked slowly into the foyer, commanding the room with effortless dominance. "Good evening, Gregory," Dominic said, his voice echoing in the dead silence. "I hope we aren't interrupting." Penelope, Gregory stammered, his eyes darting frantically between his ex-wife and the terrifying Mafia Boss beside her. He took in her diamonds, her gown, and the undeniable glow of power she radiated. What are you doing here? Who is this? Beatrice recovered her venom quickly. She marched forward, her face flushing with rage. You insolent pig, how dare you come back here? And who is this thug you brought into my home? I'll call the police. Dominic's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. Before Beatrice could take another step, Matteo moved with terrifying speed, drawing a suppressed Heckler & Koch handgun from his jacket and pressing it directly to the forehead of the nearest security guard, who immediately dropped to his knees. The society guests gasped, several women backing away in sheer terror. I wouldn't use that tone with my wife, Mrs. Hayes, Dominic said softly, the silence in the room hanging on his every word. Your wife? Gregory whispered, his face draining of all color. Yes, Dominic smiled, reaching into his breast pocket and pulling out a stack of folded legal documents. He tossed them casually onto the shattered glass at Gregory's feet. Penelope Falcone. And as of 4 p.m. today, Vanguard Holdings assumed all debts and assets associated with Crane, McGill and Associates, as well as the deed to this property. Gregory stumbled backward, gripping the banister. No, that's impossible. Vanguard is a blind trust. Vanguard is me, Dominic corrected coldly. You owe the O'Donnell family $3 million, Gregory. But worse, you owe me everything else. You're bankrupt. Your firm is insolvent. And this house is foreclosed. Panic erupted in the room. The senior partners of the law firm began shouting, demanding answers from Gregory, realizing their life savings and reputations were tied to a sinking ship. Beatrice turned to her son, her pristine facade cracking. Gregory, what is he talking about? What did you do? And then came the twist Penelope never expected. Under the crushing weight of Dominic's presence and the impending ruin, Gregory's cowardly nature completely took over. He pointed a trembling finger at his own mother. It was her, Gregory shrieked, backing away. Beatrice signed the wire transfers. She forged the senior partners' signatures. She wanted the renovations. She wanted the cars. I only laundered the money because she threatened to cut me out of the grandfather's trust. She's the one who orchestrated the fraud. The entire room went dead silent again. Beatrice stared at her son, utterly betrayed by the golden child she had worshipped. You spineless little worm, she spat, lunging at him with perfectly manicured claws. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly louder. Dominic had, of course, tipped off the FBI's Financial Crimes Division with an anonymous, heavily documented dossier hours ago. The feds are pulling up to the gates, Dominic announced to the panicked room. I suggest anyone who doesn't want to be implicated in federal racketeering charges leaves now. It was a stampede. Millionaires in tuxedos pushed past each other, rushing out the back doors to escape the incoming raid. Within seconds, only Gregory, Beatrice, Dominic, and Penelope remained in the foyer. Penelope walked forward, her ruby gown sweeping over the marble. She stopped right in front of her ex-husband and her former mother-in-law. You threw me out in the rain because I didn't fit into your perfect, fragile little world, Penelope said, her voice steady and ringing with absolute authority. She looked Beatrice up and down. You look like a desperate, pathetic old woman in that Chanel suit, Beatrice. And you, Gregory. She shifted her gaze to the man she had wasted 5 years on. Are exactly the coward I should have seen from the start. Penelope, please, Gregory begged, falling to his knees as the red and blue flashing lights of police cruisers illuminated the windows. Please talk to him. You loved me. Tell him to stop this. Penelope looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but pity. Pigs don't belong in mansions, Gregory, she echoed Beatrice's cruel words, a triumphant smirk touching her lips. Enjoy federal prison. She turned her back on them, walking flawlessly in her Louboutins back to Dominic. He looked at her with such intense, blazing pride that her breath hitched. He wrapped a heavy, protective arm around her thick waist, kissing the crown of her head. Let's go home, Mrs. Falcone, Dominic murmured, as the FBI agents stormed through the front doors, tackling Gregory to the floor and slapping cuffs on a screaming Beatrice. Dominic and Penelope walked out into the cool Chicago night. The rain had washed the world clean, and as Penelope stepped into the Rolls-Royce, she knew she had lost a pathetic boy, only to be crowned by a king. Did you love seeing Penelope rise from a discarded wife to an untouchable mafia queen? Sometimes the best revenge is simply upgrading your life and letting karma do the heavy lifting. If Penelope's glorious payback against her toxic in-laws gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their worth, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel